Folks, welcome in the ring. Welcome to our special coverage of Decision Day. It's the 18th day of January, and today the decision is being handed down on the preliminary matters in the elections petition hearing. And we welcome each and every one of you as we bring you the latest on what is happening currently. We have a number of folks who are going to join us within the first half hour to 45 minutes before the hearing starts at the High Court, and then we're going to take a break for the hearing. Then we're going to be back with some analysis after it would have been concluded. I am privileged today to be joined by none other than the former Minister of the Public Service and political scientist by training, Ms. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐑𝐢𝐧𝐠. Let's welcome her this afternoon. Very good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon,
And
Sherrod,
welcome.
and good afternoon to the viewers.
How are things
Thanks
at your
for
end?
having me. It's been good. Can't complain too much. Can't complain too much.
Great. Great, awesome. And we seem to have switched roles because yesterday I was on your program concerning the election petition matters, and now here you are.
Yeah, so that we both have a lot to say, so we're taking turns.
Great, great. As I said, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐑𝐢𝐧𝐠 is the former Minister of the Public Service and a political mind by any measure, a political scientist by training. 𝐓𝐡𝐞, tell us where we are currently. We have the two petitions before the High Court, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, yes, as you rightfully said, there are two petitions, petitions 88 and 99 before the High Court. For those of us who may not have been following, I know a lot of our supporters are very anxious as to what will be the result of today's ruling. But before we get to the ruling, I think it should be noted what transpired before. How I would perceive it, it was what should have been a case management conference to deal with the dates and stuff of moving the petition forward turned into a hearing because, as far as I see, the PPP was trying to find ways to ensure that the petition isn't heard. And so it began with the position that apparently 𝐿𝐴𝐺𝐿 was not served well. When they realized that they had no bearing on that, they went on to the perspective that David Granger was not served the way he should have been based on the laws and how election petitions are to be served in a particular time period. And, you go through signatures and stuff like that. And so they brought that to the court. And so there was a hearing on that issue. And that would be on the elections petitions 99. But how I see it, it was basically the PPP looking for ways to duck out of having to deal with all that they would have done prior leading up to March 2nd and on elections day that got us into this mess in the first place. So once that transpired, once they had the hearing, we're now waiting on the court's ruling on that hearing as to whether or not David Granger was served correctly, whether he's a proper person to be a part of the proceedings as a respondent, given that his interests would be in alignment with the petitioners.
Great. So we are going to come back to that essentially very, very soon. But let us talk to this long electoral battle that we have had and the long judicial battle within that context, coming all the way from the Judas Charandas Prasad great betrayal, as it were, on I think it was December 21 or 22nd, 2018. Since that time, we have had a whole host of court cases and hearing election based. Walk us through a little bit that period to where we are currently.
Well, I wouldn't go on to the day of what happened on that particular date, but I believe that what we saw happening was a lot of both the APNU AFC, who was then in government, and the PPP both took cases to the court all the way up to the CCJ. And while a lot of persons were of the view and of the opinion that both sides should just cede or not cede to whatever one court would have ruled or not, my take on it was that it was necessary. I see it from a historical perspective. We're a young nation. A lot of our laws, as it relates to elections, and in other areas have not really been stretched and tried to see whether or not
Tabitha,
what we were
let,
put. Yes, yes, yes.
let's step in briefly and welcome Member of Parliament Amanza Walton Desir, who is also a practicing attorney at law. And I would have neglected to say that Tabitha, you as well are a Member of Parliament. I'm happy to be joined by such brilliant minds this afternoon. Welcome.
Welcome,
Thank
Amanda.
you. Thank you, Sharon and Tabitha. It's always good to meet you guys.
Yes.
Right ahead, Tabitha.
Yes, so my perspective was that our laws, as it relates to elections and other areas, have not really been stretched and tried. And so, what the process from the no confidence motion to now, it's utilizing the laws and see whether or not what is on paper it is practical, whether or not once we utilize it, whether it makes sense or whether there are changes that need to be made. Because it's always one thing when things are in theory, but it's when we put it in practice, we recognize where the flaws may be, where the loopholes are, and then we have to go back to the books and see, well, maybe there needs to be a shift because things are not moving the way it was intended to move based on the framers of the Constitution and their thinking on what should and should not happen. And so while the process seemed long to some, I welcomed it because it was the stretching of our laws and the utilizing of the laws to determine whether or not what we have on the books is enough or whether we need to make some changes to it. So I think throughout the process we've seen where there may have been some things that were left out, some things that were not they didn't take into consideration given probably the timing and the era of when those things were the laws and the rights were written. And so we have to now take those things into consideration moving forward. And so I while it was a long period, I welcomed it because of how it has helped us to look at our laws in a different way. And a lot of Guyanese are now better, they're able to, they understand the laws a bit more. They know what it is in the Constitution. Before, nobody looked at the Constitution. Nobody tried to know what is Article 200, Article 199, or whatever. And now people are on the road arguing about whether articles make sense based on where we are. And so I think it was a learning process for the entire society. And so I don't see it as a negative. I see it as a positive from a historical perspective.
Amanda, we're picking up the discussion, bringing us to January 18 and the host of litigation you had prior to the no confidence motion that has brought us to this point, and just walking through that process. And I want to know from you if there was any particular case that may have stood out in your own mind.
I think they were all very, very important for jurisprudence. As a lawyer, I particularly appreciate the fact that, as Tabitha said, a number of the areas that we had not been tested and proven in were ventilated. And so nobody is at a disadvantage when the law is clarified. You see, and so being a young nation, and again, this is what we often fail to realize, that we are a very young nation in the scheme of things. America is what, 200 and something years old, and so we are all the stronger for all of this. Now there may be people who are impatient, and understandably so, Sharon. These are frustrating times, but if you're going to build a society based on law and order, this is important.
Yes.
It is important that the law be clarified. One thing the law must always be is certain. And this is why the judiciary has such an important role to play today. Today is a deciding day in the future of the judiciary in Guyana. And so I hope that this is not lost on them. It should not take protest action in the street and agitation for the weightiness of that responsibility to occur to any judge. So guys, are you getting a feedback? Would you prefer if I use the headset?
I'm not getting a feedback at my end. The audio is quite clear.
There's a little bit of a feedback. There's a little bit on my end.
Whatever makes you comfortable.
No, well, I can of course put in a headset, but I'll have to rummage for it. But just to make the point that it is very, very important, and so you'll always have naysayers. You will always have people who think that it will go one way or the other. But the courts have always been the balancing. The court has always been the place where the balance is established between the legislature and the executive. That is the role of the court. And so it is important that the court uphold that role. It is important that the court continues to show itself um, as the bastion for justice for the Guyanese people. Uh, the rule of law is a fundamental pillar if we are going to build a nation. So this is it. This is not dispensable, Sharon. This is not dispensable by any stretch of the imagination. And so people need to continue to be patient. What I will say is, anywhere the wind blows, an election petition is going to be heard.
Great. We have talked several times, and the Chief Justice has said several times that certain aspects of litigating our election process is for an elections petition. And yet we see a whole host of private criminal charges brought against several members of the GCOM staff. We have Keith Lowenfield, Clement Mingo, Keith Lowenfield being the Chief Elections Officer, Clement Mingo being the Returning Officer for Region 4, Enrique Levan, Michelle Miller, Carolyn Duncan, Sheffrin February, Dwight Hetzberger, Roxanne Myers. All of these are GCOM staff in some aspect of being prosecuted now by the state from private criminal charges. I think the state is now taking over these charges. And then we have political activists who are being prosecuted as well by the PPPC administration. These include Walden Lawrence, Carol Joseph, Christopher Jones, and the list goes on. What is the sense of the two things running on parallel tracks? These private criminal charges, quote unquote, now being managed by the state, and then you have two election petitions.
My hunch is that it is hoped that one will impugn the credibility of potential witnesses in the other. But I do not take it. I do not believe it has merit, because believe you me, if these if this was serious, trials would have begun already. You have to understand the nature of the PPP. It is not if they have ground to proceed, they are going to proceed. Particularly in this context of wanting to embarrass and humiliate persons who they view as not bending to their will. Now,
Yes.
go ahead, Tabby.
No, you can continue when you finish.
No, so I pay it charge shrift. I think it is for PR and for shock effect, but you have to be a steady head in studying all of this. And so once you can steady your head and study this, you understand what is happening. The law is clear as to the validity of the testing of the validity of the uh, of the holding of the petition. And let me hasten to say, Sharon, if you have nothing to fear, why are you trying to throw this thing out at the preliminary stage?
Yeah,
No, and I'm being serious here. The ventilation of this matter is so critical to Guyana's growth going forward. It is critical. It is critical to determine how we hold elections. It is critical to determine the need for reform. And you have been touting about rigging and all kind of story. Then let it be heard. Let it be heard. The fact remains that the evidence has been presented. The death certificates of persons who would have voted, etc., are in existence. This is not something that is conjecture, right? You have affidavits from people who are out of the jurisdiction. These are all present in the press. We've seen, people who have said, look, I haven't been here, but a vote is cast in my name. And You have GCOM recognizing that these are serious allegations, but underscoring that, this is not for us to decide. This is for an elections petition. And so now there is a chance to hear an elections petition, and you want to object on preliminary grounds. And we'll get into those grounds as we go on, so that you understand how ridiculous it really is. Because the person in the person of David Granger, the lawyers have explained, look, we named him as a respondent out of an abundance of caution. And that is quite appropriate, and that is quite fine. The court has the power to determine whether a person can be added or removed as a party. He has gone a step forward and to say, look, I will not be defending the petition. So what they are saying is that, look, you have served this thing out of time on the man who is saying he has no interest in defending the petition. You understand? It is not that even Bart Lagner or anybody has been served out of time. It is David Granger who they are saying. And the issue of service has been clarified in affidavits. So, a lot of it is for shock effect. And the court has its job cut out for it, because, like I said, we have to determine now what direction we take the country in.
Yes,
Indeed.
I wholeheartedly agree with Amanda there. I'd go a step further. I think it was a bit of an overreach on the PPP part. I think they were quite anxious as soon as they got into got into office in August, and they knew this thing was coming, and they were trying to scare tactic its way out of the situation. So they felt as if once they could bring up these charges, that people will get scared and run. And so they would no longer be willing to be part of any petition. And so I think it was a bit of an overreach, because they could not see down the road what would happen. And but that is now globally and all of that. So they were very they were very anxious. There was a lot of anxiety, and I think they overreached in those circumstances, because I do not think, as Amanda said, it would have any impact when it is that if those persons have to now go before the court to give evidence in the petitions. And so I think in the long run they would realize that it was not the best way to play their cards, but they did it because that is what they know to do. You would have seen for example, Jaipur Sharma saying that people are surrounding his home and driving by his home, and the Attorney General allegedly was making threats because he was putting some certain statements out there. That is how they know to act. They don't know anything else. And so it was another version of that we saw coming out, because they know what they did during the elections, and they had no better way of dealing with the repercussions once the petitions are to be heard. And so they felt that one way of dealing with it is going after persons who they think would have a significant input into the petitions once it's being heard before the court.
Great. Folks, just to alert you that we were told initially that the hearing on these preliminary matters and ruling on these preliminary matters was to start at 1 o'clock, but I'm being advised it's starting at 1:30. So I crave your indulgence. I know we had just planned to be on for half hour with commentary and then take a break for the ruling and then come back afterwards. So I'm giving you notice and I crave your indulgence. One of the cases that stood out during the process was a case dealing with the returning officer for Region 4, Mr. Clement Mingo, being held in contempt. And I think one of the allegations that formed the basis of that case was allegations of rigging. And I remember that the Chief Justice said, in her words, she spoke with the now Attorney General, Mr. Nandlal, and asked him if he was willing to proceed with the matter, if he had the evidence, what's not. And he was convinced that he wanted to proceed with the matter. And the day before her ruling, he withdrew the matter. And with that, he drew the ire of the Chief Justice, who said that he would have wasted the court's time, knowing that he was on thin ground from the start, and that there was no evidence to support these allegations that he was bringing of rigging and all of that. Um, Knowing that now, that what Anil was trying to do was to pull at Donald Trump to prosecute a matter without any evidence, and the fact that we have a mountain of evidence on our side, where do you think we are currently in this process litigating these issues?
I think the difference, and I'm going to make, as you made reference to the Donald Trump matter, I will sort of make some differences between what's happened here and what happened in the U.S. One of the major differences in our case, which is not usually normal for petitions in Guyana, is that because there was an audit done before there was an actual not a ruling, but before there was a decision as to who became who is president. Because there was an audit done, you got a sense of what exactly transpired during the elections. Generally, for petitions in Guyana, you have to have the swearing in of a president, and then you take your issues to the court, and then sometimes the process is drawn out. There's a long process into whether or not you can actually go into the boxes, and how it is we're going into the boxes, and what will we be looking for in the boxes, and all of that. But what we saw was that there was an audit before all of that transpired, and so we have a clear sense of what happened on March 2nd, even though we're now getting to the petition. The difference in the United States is that there's actually a period after the vote count where you have the possibility of going to the court to say, hey, there are issues here. Can we now confront them before we get to a conceding, or, that before the electoral college is accounted to determine who is the actual winner of the elections? And during that process, it was evident that there was no sufficient fraud to overturn the results of the United States elections. But that is a difference in the process in the United States as opposed to Guyana, that they have a period after the elections day and the results come out where they could go to the court and say, hey, we have issues with these numbers. Whereas in
Right.
Guyana, it is supposed to happen once the president is sworn in, and then you go to parliament and you go through that process. And so there's a clear distinction there. And so I think we're in a better place. I know I'm saying this because there are a lot of persons that I have spoken to. There are different tiers. There are those who believe what the coalition is saying, and there are those who are saying that the coalition was just lying. They were just making up these things during the recount process because they have to carry a certain narrative, but it's not true. The PP won, and blah blah blah. And what this petition hearing will do is set the correct narrative out there, which is not the narrative that PP has put out over the last couple of months, but the truth of what took place before and on March 2nd. And we know it because we know what happened in the recount process. But for those persons who are of the view that everything that we would have said during that recount process, they just did not believe it, then they would be getting a true sense of what took place, even though we know they will now be able to know. And so I think we're in a good place now. It's just this ruling to take us forward, and see where it leads.
I agree, Sharon. Look, I agree. And to add to what Tabitha so importantly pointed out, is that look, let's take it one step further. This is not the allegation of the coalition. You have a press release from the chief, from the Honorable former Chief Justice, Justice Claudette Singh, saying, yes, these are quite damning
Yeah.
allegations. She wrote to the relevant statutory bodies to corroborate these allegations. The head of the immigration responded. The head of the GRO responded, providing the information that she needed. And then she said, you know what? Oh, yeah, hey, this is serious, but I do not have the power of a petition court. So you have to take it to the correct forum. Yes, discrepancies exist. So it is only in the minds of those who want to engage in just pure self-deception that they're still thinking that this is the narrative of the coalition. GCOM itself has admitted, the Madam Chairperson herself has said, yes, there are significant concerns, but I do not have the power to address it. And so that is very, very important. You have an admission by the Guyana Elections Commission that, hey, we got a problem. We do not believe that the law allows us to address it. I happen to share a different view. But we are here. Everybody, all and sundry say elections petition. We are here. And the fact remains that any first or second year law student, Sherrod, and you know this, will know that the court has the power to cure a defect.
Correct.
You know that the court has hardly ever refused to hear the merits of a case based on a procedural irregularity of service upon a party who is not even saying that you didn't serve me in time, so it got to be thrown out. The PPP is relying on what it appears to be an irregularity in service on David Granger to throw the matter out. It's not a Jack Deere was not served in time. And so, to my mind, if people would stop and engage in informed debate and informed discussions, we will see and understand that this is bigger than the PPP, it is bigger than the AP and UAFC. It is about laying the strong and sure foundation for the building of our democracy. And I'm saying, listen, I'll go further to say this, Sharon. I have found that unfortunately, the sentiments of a lot of Guyanese is that oppression is okay as long as I am doing the oppression. I don't want to be oppressed, but it's okay as long as I am doing it. And we have very few calls for reform. We have very few calls to say, look, we want a nation that is as far as possible going to be built on laws and what is right and what is just, and not just what is convenient.
Yeah.
Based on who is in power.
Yeah.
And that has to be the call of the Guyanese people, that we want a system that works. We want a system that returns power to the people, which we started with local government elections. We want a system that ensures that minimizes the opportunity for people being victimized because of race and political affiliation. So this is serious. This is serious nation building business we're talking about. This is not play, and Guyana now will decide whether we want to keep going around the mulberry bush or we want to take stock of ourselves. The judiciary has to decide today whether they're going to be that vanguard or not. Because, Sharon, like I said, you know the case law. It is seldom that a procedural defect, and one that has been answered and explained, would be used. Can you imagine 5 years from now what the legacy is going to be? Yes, it was serious, but we didn't hear it because there was some irregularity in the service. You don't think that this is important enough for the court to cure the defect and to proceed to hear the matter so that once and for all Guyanese could be put at rest about what really happened? So I wait with bated breath to see what the ruling will be.
And justice has to be done. Justice has to be done. Tabitha brought up, I actually brought up Trump, and Tabitha picked me up on that point. During the course of our election, especially the days preceding the March 2nd, we saw the storming of GCOM. We saw something similar at Capitol Hill, and they have denounced it very strongly as insurrection. And the persons who would have participated in that activity there storming Capitol Hill as insurrectionists. We saw something similar at GCOM Hatfield Street location. We saw the stealing of school buses. We saw policemen in the street being chased by civilians in places like Bad Settlement. And we saw one policeman was a gentleman attempting to chop a policeman at Cotton Tree. What do you make of those events in our own country in the early days after the March 2nd general and regional elections?
I can look back and say, thank God that the APNU AFC is on record as saying 3 things. We will respect the Constitution, we will respect the decision of the courts, and we will respect GCOM. Because believe me, had that been a mob of APNU AFC persons, the narrative would have been different and we would have been deemed Trumpian in our approach. But we are on record, much to the criticism of a lot of our people. Y'all need to take to the streets and all of these things. Can you imagine, given the geopolitical shift that has just happened, where we would have been? You see, we would have been no different. We would have been no different. And so hindsight is always 2020, but I'm grateful that we are on record as maintaining one position. And it is a position that we maintain up to today. It is a position we maintain up to today. And so we are relying on the courts not to fail, not the APNU AFC. This is not about the courts failing the APNU AFC. This is about the courts failing the people of Guyana. And were we not so politically divided as a nation, we could possibly see that this is bigger than any party. This is bigger than any party. You know, I get very, like, so you would hear people talk about SOPs. Like, what level of intellect must you be at to still be talking about SOPs? You understand what I'm saying? The government wasn't sworn in on the basis of SOPs. Like, how backward do you have to be in your thinking to be still talking about SOPs? The only valid SOPs are those that are in the possession of GCOM that they use to tabulate, not the ones published on February 29th or whenever it was, 28th, but what day it was. And so
Whatever date it was. It has been really overtaken by other events.
These people who allow their mouths to act without the benefit of their intellect must be called out. So, you know, yeah, never mind.
Tabitha, what are your thoughts there?
I see it's aggravating sometimes. Um, but I of course I agree with Amanza. I agree with her wholeheartedly. I look at what transpired that night at GCOM headquarters, and you look at what is happening in the United States, and people are now trying to pull back in the US. They took it to the brink and then they had no control of what happened afterwards. Some are even suggesting that they knew what was going to happen and they wanted it to happen. I'm not going to go that far. I don't know. I wasn't in the minds of those who were part of that process. But I continuously make the connection between the type of governance that the United States had under Trump and what the PPP is trying to do here in Guyana. I think they were playing on his modus operandi. They were using it as much as they could to see how far they can get with what it is that they wanted to do in Guyana. They utilize his some of his sayings, some of his narrative, some of his the way in which they looked at situations and determined how to deal with situations. They got it straight out of the Trump playbook because they recognized that what he was doing would fall squarely into how they know how to move and operate. And so they determined that that is how they would be able to effectively, turn things around in their favor, whether legally or illegally, legitimately or not. And so they reached the what happened that night at the GCOM's office, what happened at Bad Settlement. You were seeing the videos, and the videos was of the leader saying to the people that this is what is going to happen and this is what you should do. He preempted it. He told them what to do, and then they went into Bad Settlement and they did it. The person from Bad Settlement and the school buses, because they were told to do it, and that is the same thing that they're dealing with now in the US. And what is even more striking, I don't know if anybody recognized, but the 49 boxes is almost around 11,000 something votes.
Right.
The
On the other,
Trump station with the with the secretary it was for 11,800 and something votes. It is almost eerily similar as to how it is that they have decided. It's almost like if they came together and decided this is how we're going to tackle these two elections. It is quite uncanny that it is so similar, and they're supposedly first, well, supposedly not. But like we play out of the same playbook, they have no advantage in terms of the 200 years independence and governance structure. It is just basically, and what I think it shows, because we all know what we get here with the PPP in office. We all know that. We all know their modus operandi. We all know where their thinking comes from and what their interests are. And I would say it's quite similar to what was going on over the last 4 years in the US. And so there was a common ground that they could meet and break bread on. And but now they have to deal with the realities of the situation on both ends. And so when I was saying it was an overreach earlier, because you couldn't see down the line what would happen, they were overreaching with the expectation that they would have coverage because they would have taken care of that with the with Mercury. But now they
You know,
have to go a different route. And
and
so we now
Sharon,
have to see
sorry.
what happens moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. And to add to what Tabby is saying, I often hear people say, you have to take to the streets, you have to take to the streets, you have to take to the streets. And let me say, before I got involved in politics, that would have probably been my reaction. But then the balancing act that you have to perform sometimes makes you seem as if you're not doing anything. But from a historical perspective, and Tabi as a historian will say to you that if you, for example, a lot of people allude to the United States, but if you trace the history of struggle in the United States, you would see that before popular movements such as BLM and all of these movements were birthed, it came out of a failure of the system to demonstrate that it will work for the people. And as Guyanese, we have to be able to stop and say and appreciate that we are in the phase of our development where we are trying to establish democratic institutions. And we are trying to see that our institutions work for the people. Now, if it continues to break down, you will see things obviously just from the discontent of the people going in a particular direction. And so these are all the considerations that must inform the Chief Justice's mind when she sits down to rule this afternoon. You understand?
Yeah.
You have a group of people who are being called weak for saying, let's give our institutions a chance to work. We are 50 years old, we're trying to develop this thing, right? Let's see if it works. And so we got to, when we
And
reference Guyana and the US, context is so important. The trajectory that you are on, the place that you are in terms of your development is very, very important because the US had decades, if not 100 years, of struggling for civil rights, of establishing laws, and so on and so forth.
And they still haven't gotten it right.
Yeah, so this is not half-baked. And what we are failing as Guyanese to do, Sharon, is that we are failing to appreciate that should we, the people, irrespective of our political affiliation, get together and decide we want better governance, it is the fastest way to achieve a secure republic. But we have those people who are hell-bent on commercializing, on trading on racism, on trading on the divide. And these are all seeds sown since the colonial times that we are now
Well,
reaping fruit.
well, let me pick you up on seeds sown.
Yeah.
Folks who are joining us, you are watching In the Ring, a very special coverage of Decision Day as we await the ruling of the High Court on the preliminary matters concerning the elections petition that is before the court. That coverage starts at 1:30, and we're going to take a break at that time to take you over to that ruling, and then we're going to come back after with some coverage. But as we talked there about seeds sown, Manza, we saw recently that a major publication pulled back a report, a very devastating report that they had done in early 2019, I think it was, concerning our mismanagement of the oil and gas sector. They have now pulled back this report. Some persons say that this report in the first instance did a lot of damage when it first came out, because I think it said that we would have given up about 55 billion US dollars in terms of our management of the oil and gas sector. And now they have pulled back this report now that there's a new government in place. And some persons argue that this was a seed sown, that reports like this were bought and paid for. Your thoughts? Global wickedness.
You go, Tabby. You go.
let me start. It was, if I'm correct, it was almost a month before the elections, a couple months before the elections, that this thing came to light, and it would have been okay if they said nothing, but the fact that they decided at this particular point in time to retract that entire statement, they didn't say they're retracting one line or two sentences because they say they look back at the numbers and they made a mistake and it's not 55, it's 50 or something. They retracted the entire statement. And when you see something like that, it begs you, a number of questions come to mind. Why now? And take into consideration that this is an entity, it's worldwide, world renowned. They generally don't care about what they do in one country that they deem to be third world. So much they don't generally care that if they realize they make a mistake, they will say, oh my, oh well, let's move on and go on to the next. But a retraction suggests something else. A retraction suggests that this is not just some muddy conscience decide to say, okay, we went too far in Guyana, let's go back. That is not how these entities think and operate. But you are right. It was intentionally done to create in the public in Guyana a perception of the APNUFC, a particular perception of the then Minister of Natural Resources and the entire government. And I think it worked because the newspapers carried it, all front pages. 𝐲𝐶 News used it from the day it was released until even after the elections, because it was all about oil and gas for 𝐲𝐶 News. So you have to see the editorial last week, where they're also now wondering whether they were being used to facilitate something that was not accurate. And these are the things that as Guyanese, we have to be so careful about what it is we listen to and what it is that we believe, because information is so much at our fingertips, and those who control the information know it. And so they utilize these ways of getting to us so that they could have the outcome that they want. And then in the end, we're left dealing with the repercussions of it, and they've moved on to something else. And I'm wondering how many people woke up after reading that retraction, who may have changed their perspective totally of the APNUFC based on that article. What are they now saying to themselves?
As a matter of fact, in part of the retraction reads, we regret any unintended negative consequences arising from the report, including its stifling of debate within Guyana around the actions to address climate change. So we're sorry. Let's move on.
No. This is Global Witness pivoting.
Global wickedness.
This is Global Witness pivoting because they know the champions of climate change are coming in. That is all that is. So Guyana was simply collateral damage, or could be simply viewed as collateral damage. This is them pivoting because you have a president who is out of office, who removed them from the Paris Accord. So now the champions of that are returning to office. We had better pivot if we want to survive. And so as long as Guyanese refuse to engage in this level of discourse, we will always be blown about with every wind of doctrine. And you know what will be interesting, Sherrod?
Tell me.
If it turns out that this deal that the APNU AFC made would be the best that we could get given certain events. Because if the focus is now on clean energy and climate change, it means that the price of oil dives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And then,
you've been able to lock in a deal at a critical time. So
and that's a
even
fantastic point. A fantastic one, because one of the things I've been saying is that this report can be used against itself, because it tells us in the report, it says that there's a downturn in the price of oil and the demand for oil. So the heavy investment that would have been made by companies like Exxon and the others are not going to be there in the future.
but not only that, how much what percentage are you getting as a signing as a what
Yeah.
will you be getting? Because basically what you're saying, it is better the fuel remain in the ground because we're moving to take. So the you can't have your cake and eat it. It is not
Yep.
possible to have your cake and eat it. And so I look forward to see what the next few years brings in terms of climate change, in terms of the direction that the oil sector takes. Because this is basically Global Witness ringing the bell to say, hey, you
Yep.
understand? And so I wait to see. But of course, there will always be a segment of our population who, because they do not consider that they are responsible for their destinies, and so they have a duty to make an informed decision. And all of this is tied back. All of this is tied back to the fact of how you see, in spite, and this is going to be very contentious, but I'm going to say it anyway. In spite of the fact that sugar is failing, we want to keep people on the sugar plantation. Instead of pivoting our people for the 21st century, we are flagging an industry that is dead. And nobody stops to ask why. Nobody stops to demand and understand that those lands could be converted into far more lucrative agriculture produce. Nobody stops to consider that it's important to right size the industry. You see? All I
And
know is
with
that,
that, Mansa, it is the PPPC government who fired 60 persons from the Wales estate, which is now going to be a gas to shore facility. The same people who chided APNU AFC for firing sugar workers fired 60, and we are made to understand they're rather firing some of the sugar estates coming, because they rehire and they refire with the same speed.
it will happen. It will happen because you see what sometimes the reality of the truth, people prefer that you lie to them. Because the truth is a difficult thing to handle. People actually prefer lie to me. You understand? Because to come face to face with the reality that I need to change my paradigm is a scary thing. This is what I've known all my life. All I've known is waking up, cutting. My mommy do it, my papa do it, Bauji do it. Everybody, this is what we know. And so we got to appreciate the psychological part of those people, that change is scary.
Fear
Change
of the
is a
unknown.
process. And you see people talking crap about, oh, why you didn't do it in the first 5 years? It's 5 years. Change is a process. Foundations have to be laid for change. And this is why going forward, we have to have constitutional reform, because this bill and break every time there's a 5 years is a disservice to the people of Guyana.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, Sharon, I'm done. I get passionate about it because I believe that we're being robbed of our birthright by taking this very narrow political view. When the truth is that if we work together and we put our heads together, we can make this nation all that we want it to be. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's annoying to say the least, man.
I
But
I
it is,
like
it
that.
is the reality that we live in. We live in a
Yeah.
reality
Um,
basically where one set people, they're just interested in themselves, and then the other set, we're trying to be the sane ones in the room, but it's kind of hard when one set is just built on telling lies,
And Sharon,
and
let me
then
make
they're feeding
sorry
those lies, and people
precisely.
accept those lies, and then you like the sane one in the room, but hey, that's not true, but nobody believes you because the lies seem to be it's easier to swallow than the truth.
Yeah, and this is true because and the sad reality is that when you look at the distribution of wealth, it's not necessarily getting down to their base. But we have to address this thing in the psyche of Guyanese that I acquire a sense of superiority when the man in State House looks like me.
But that's not just Guyana. That's what happened
But
in the
this is
states.
true. This is true. This is true.
All those
I'm
people that
saying
gone
that.
to the capital, you think they're getting anything? They didn't say, they didn't say.
I want to close out in terms of what the part of what the report said, the global wickedness report. They said here that as COVID-19 continues to depress demand for fossil fuels, and as countries implement policies to restrict the use of fossil fuels in order to tackle climate change, the prospects for sustainable income generation from new oil projects are increasingly questionable. So they were using this as their base to revise this 55 billion that the Apple AFC would have lost having signed these contracts. Interesting.
And I would point out on that note that when you look at the decade of development that the AP and UFC would have put out, it is in recognition that the with climate change and with this move to renewable energy, that the price of oil would not stay where it is. And so we have to move quickly to diversifying our economy, utilizing as much as we can get from the oil right now to diversify our economy, so that whenever that dip happens and oil is no longer seen as what it is now, that we can still continue, we would have developed our society and we would have been able to move forward even if oil no longer brings what it currently brings. And that was the thinking and the thought process into a lot of the decisions that were being made at that time in relation to oil, the signing, and the decade of development that came out afterwards.
Please, as we come to rather the moment of truth, we're almost on 1:30 for the start of the hearing. Remind our viewers what these hearings, what are at stake here, and the context in which we should be viewing the proceedings.
All right. So just very quickly, there are two petitions. One is fact based, and one is based on points of law. It is quite interesting that the one that is fact based is the one that is being challenged. Because should that go through, it damages the very gut of the PPPC argument that the APNU were rigging and all sorts of things, and will show definitively what happened. And so the PPPC have a vested interest in making sure that those death certificates that we tender is never accepted into evidence. That those affidavits of people who are out of the jurisdiction but votes have been recorded in their names are never tendered. And so we have to appreciate what is at stake here. The PPP does not want this particular petition to go forward because it will once and for all show who the riggers are. And I could rest assured that if it were to show that the APNU were the riggers, it was going forward. It would have gone forward unchallenged. But this is the kind of thinking that our people refuse to do, and we keep engaging in all kind of hiram skirum theories. The other one is on a point of law, and that is that the recount was inherently unconstitutional and was based on unconstitutional grounds. So either way, an elections petition is going to go forward. What I will say is that it will be a horrible blight on our judiciary if a matter that is critical to the foundation of this nation is thrown out on a technicality, right? That a man who has indicated that I'm not even going to defend these proceedings was not allegedly served in time.
Folks, let us leave it there. I know you ladies are going to be on the other side of the ruling with me, and we're going to be joined by some other folks. I want to thank you for joining me for coming through thus far, and see you guys on the other side. We're going to toss the broadcast now to our team on the other side, who are going to be giving you the ruling of the High Court in the elections, the preliminary matters concerning the elections petition cases. And we're going to see you on the other side. We're going to be losing our folks on Twitter until we come back, and the folks joining us via YouTube. But you can follow along on any of our Facebook pages. Folks, thank you, and we're going to see you on the other side of the ruling. Over to the other team.